Hello Year 9, this is a quick video with feedback from the summer exam. It's Mr Winrow here, and every Year 9 exam has been marked by me this summer, which means that your class teacher, unless you're in 9B, won't be able to answer your questions immediately, necessarily, about the summer exam. So if you're looking at a question and you've got 7 marks out of 10 and you want to know why, the quickest and easiest place to get that answer is in this video. Okay? Before we start, there is a mistake on the front of the exam paper. Section B is not out of 32, it's out of 36, which means that the total marks on offer in this exam are 54. So please keep that in mind. I think I've changed those numbers on every exam paper, but just in case I haven't and I've missed yours, please note that section B is out of 36 and the final score is out of 54. This video won't go through the Socrative answers to section A, it's going to focus on the exam style answers to section B. What I'll do is quickly go through each question, then the mark scheme, and then show you an example answer which received full marks, which will hopefully, those three things combined, will explain to you how you have gained or missed out on marks for every question. Okay, so question number 1 in section B was a source-based question, an engraving produced in 1881 showing enslaved people being loaded onto a ship. And the question is, what can a historian learn from this source? 8 marks. It asks you to use the content, provenance, and your own knowledge. Now, this is similar to a GCSE style question. In a GCSE exam, the question will be, how useful is this source? We've used the phrase, what can a historian learn? So here's the mark scheme for question 1 on section B. It's out of 8 marks, and I have given 2 marks for each skill that you need to mention. 2 marks for content, 2 for provenance, 2 for your own knowledge, and 2 marks for the focus on the question. What I mean by focus on the question is, have you focused on what historians can learn from looking at the source? Content is what you can see. The provenance is when and where it has come from, and the knowledge is what do you know about the topic that matches up to the details in the source. So here's our example answer, and you should see the letters F, C, K and P marked on your answers when you go through this feedback. F for focus, C for content, P for provenance, K for knowledge. So you can see here in this answer that I've picked up on is that this answer starts exactly as I expect it to. A historian could learn that. That's what I'm looking for. Focus on the question. What can we learn as historians? It's important that you don't think of historians as people working in universities with grey hair and tweed jackets. When you are in a history classroom, when you're studying history at any level, you are a historian. So you could essentially translate this question to what can we learn, because we are all historians when we're doing a summer exam. A lot of you have got a really good knowledge of content, but the best answers were able to provide their own knowledge and also consider provenance. What's important to note with the provenance is that this was produced in 1881, which is after the abolition of slavery, both in Britain and the United States. So slavery is abolished altogether in the British Empire in 1833. Slavery in America, in the USA, is abolished in 1865. So well done to those people for the provenance who noticed that it was produced after the abolition of slavery. Generally, as a year group, your content coverage was very good. You've got good knowledge of the topic. The key work that we need to look at, really, particularly for those of you wanting to study history at GCSE, is considering provenance as well. So when and where it has come from and how that affects the source. Okay, question 2, study interpretation A. Use interpretation A and your own knowledge to explain how women gained the vote. So this is Professor Jane Purvis, famous historian. A lot of our A-level historians who choose to study women's rights look at Purvis for their NEA, their History A-level coursework. So you've got the quote there, and it's requiring you to use the interpretation, so just the content and your knowledge to back it up. So we'll have a look at the mark scheme now. Okay, so in this one you will see that you can have 4 marks for content and 4 marks for knowledge. If it is absent altogether, 0 marks. If the content is implicit, meaning that I can tell that you have read the interpretation but you haven't quoted it directly, then that's implicit use of content. Implicit knowledge is if you've got 2 or more factors but it's generic. So a sentence like the suffragettes were violent and the suffragists were not. That to me is implicit knowledge. It's not precise. So if your knowledge is generic or you've got really good understanding of just one factor, then that's a limitation there. 2 marks maximum for implicit content or knowledge. And then explicit use of the source and explicit knowledge, which is 2 or more factors and it is precise, means that you can gain up to 4 marks each for those skills in this 8-mark question. Okay, so let's have a look at this example answer. You should see in front of you, with my marking, the letters C and K. C whenever you have quoted the interpretation, and as a year group, we're very good at that, quoting it directly. And then K whenever we have some supporting knowledge to back up what we know with what we're reading in the interpretation. I think what was important is having knowledge beyond the suffragettes, so knowing what the suffragists did, but also having an awareness of what women did during the war. So I think a lot of people mentioned women working during the First World War, and you might see a comment from me that says such as. So tell me, what were women doing? What was supposedly a man's job that women stepped up into at this time? So in question 2, 4 marks for content, ideally 2 quotes explicitly taken from the interpretation, and then up to 4 marks for knowledge. And again, the marks are given based on whether you have precise knowledge of 2 or more factors. And those factors in this question are the suffragettes, the suffragists, and women helping during the First World War. Okay, finally, questions 3, 4 and 5, the final questions of section B. I'm not going to give you an example answer for each type of question. I'll just show you one. What was important to note, and what almost everybody did, is that they answered 2 questions from the list below. In very rare circumstances, some people only attempted 1 question, and also in the past people have tried to attempt all 3. But you answered 2 questions. Question 3 was about how and why slavery was abolished in Britain. And I stress that because a lot of people who answered this question talked about the Haitian Revolution, which wasn't the British Empire, that was the French Empire. Or you might have talked about Harriet Tubman, who again was an inspirational individual, but in the United States, and worked for abolition in America. Question number 4. How the legacy of slavery has continued to impact Britain since its abolition. And what's important here is that you don't talk about slavery whilst it was legal, and you're talking about the long-term impact of enslavement. And actually the example answer I'm going to show you is from question 4, because this was an answer that was very popular with the year group. A lot of people answered it, and a lot of people did it very well. Question number 5, write an account of conditions in the trenches in the Western Front during World War I. Before we move on any further, what's important to note is that it asks for an overall conclusion. And I'll talk about how marks can be gained by including an overall conclusion on the next slide. Okay, so easiest mark you can get in this 10-mark answer is 0, where you write nothing at all or nothing relevant to the question. 1 to 2 marks if you have implicit knowledge of the topic. Quite often students will get 1 or 2 marks if they're running out of time and they just about start an answer. And it's clear to me that you're starting an answer that's relevant, but you haven't been able to develop it fully. 3 to 5 marks if you have some good knowledge of a topic with some links to the question, there's no attempt at a conclusion, and if you only talk about 1 point, 1 factor, the maximum amount of marks you can get is 5. 6 to 8 marks if you have precise knowledge of 2 or more points with effective links back to the question and a hinted judgment or conclusion. 9 to 10 marks on offer if you have excellent knowledge of 2 or more points, with excellent links back to the question and a clear judgment or conclusion at the end. So you can see there that a lot of people missed out on 9 or 10 marks and were limited to 6, 7 or 8 simply by missing out a 1 or 2 sentence conclusion at the end of the answer. You can also see that a lot of people were limited to 5 if they had really good knowledge of one factor, but didn't mention another that was relevant to the question. Okay, everyone, let's have a look at our final answer to help us to understand where marks were awarded for questions 3, 4 and 5. Remember, you should have answered 2 of those questions. Almost everybody chose question 4 and another alongside it. So you can see here in this answer, there's really good knowledge of the cotton famine of the 1860s and how that impacted Britain after the abolition in Britain. But at the same time, there was a campaign in America for abolition, and that had an impact, particularly in the northwest of England. And then the other factor mentioned in this answer is campaigns for reparations or independence in countries like Barbados and Jamaica. 2 other factors you could mention is the debate around statues and commemorating individuals who were involved in the slave trade. A lot of answers mentioned Edward Colston, who had a statue erected of him in Bristol, not Liverpool, as some people wrote in their answers. Speaking of Liverpool, some people also mentioned about the impact on things like street names and how we remember individuals in that sense. So a lot of people talked about Liverpool and the impact on the names of buildings and streets in that city too. You can see here we've got a conclusion at the end. Therefore, overall, the legacy of slavery is one filled with dark truths, the abolition of slavery. Most importantly, the significant impact on Britain, specifically Lancashire, which caused a dramatic economic downfall for Britain. So you can see there in the conclusion, there is a judgment on the most important factor, which here is said to be the cotton famine of the 1860s. I've chosen this answer because it's mentioned some factors that were less popular for the people that answered question 4. Most people focused on Colston and Liverpool, and here you can see the other factors that you could mention as well. Okay, Year 9, if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I hope that was useful in helping you to figure out where marks were awarded and where you may individually have missed out on marks in the summer exam. So I hope it was useful to you. Your history teacher will give you as a class specific instruction on what to do with this video. But my advice to 9B is going to be that they look through their answers and they annotate where more marks could have been awarded so that they can clearly see not only what's gone right, but where the answers could have been improved also. Well done, everyone.